Okie doke. I think we have quite a little bit to cover today. So I am going to go ahead and hand it to Alexis and Catherine.
Thanks, Danielle. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the graduate preview program. We are going to jump right in today because we have a lot to cover. So I just want to introduce myself, as I believe I'm a new face to many of you here today. My name is Alexis Roberts. I'm a fourth year, headed into my fifth year here in the Population Biology graduate group, and I'll be leading this session today along with my lab mate and friends.
Hi, I'm Catherine Korn. I'm also a graduate student in population biology. I'm so excited to be here with you all today.
So yes, thank you again for joining us. As a reminder, this series is facilitated by a group of PhD students here at UC Davis in population biology. You'll see a number of us on this call, along with some other graduate students and postdocs who are serving as your mentors. Can all of the grad students, postdocs, facilitators, session leaders just give a wave to everyone? Great, thank you all. Okay, and thank you again for all the participants for joining us for the fourth session of the program this year. We know that you all have covered a lot about the mechanics of graduate school and how it all works. And we are going to take today to shift our focus to be a little bit more big picture and have a discussion about all of the factors to consider when finding a good fit for a lab or a program. And by this, we mean finding a place where you can thrive not only professionally and academically, but personally as well. So just a quick reminder about the scope and us as facilitators. This is just a 90-minute workshop that it really serves as an introduction to the topics that we're talking about. We encourage you to use the resources that we'll post on our website and social media platforms to really dig deeper. And also remember that we are peer facilitators and we're graduate students and postdocs, and we're learning and growing every day just like you. We want to serve as like helpers and guides to you all as you are getting into this journey yourselves. Quick reminders about our session norms. Please keep your video on if possible, stay muted unless you're speaking, and raise your hand or type in the chat if you have a question. This really helps us to engage and connect with you all better. And as always, please be respectful and curious. So a little bit about our session goals for finding a good fit. We would like for all of you as participants by the end of this session to be able to evaluate what major factors are important or most important to you in your graduate school experience, and also understand faculty perspectives on finding a good fit. And with that said, we're going to jump into our warm-up activity. I believe that Catherine is setting up our breakout sessions right now, but we want you to take a second to identify one factor that you feel is important to choosing a good graduate program or lab.
I hope you had a great conversation with your breakout group. So hold on to those things that you discussed, because we are going to come back to what you guys talked about and felt like was a priority later. So just as an overview of the plan for today, we're going to talk through a number of things today, and we're going to start with the top 5 things that we think matter to your fit and happiness in graduate school. Later on, we'll have flash talks from faculty about their experience finding a career and finding a good fit. And then we'll have a Q&A session with professors, as well as some concluding remarks. All right, so let's get into it. My slides
are the slides lagging for you all?
A little bit, they are.
Okay.
And also, while you're paused, do you guys mind turning on closed captions? Something we should have done earlier, sorry.
Yes, it's done.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the top 5 things that we think are a big priority for finding a good fit in graduate program are advisor fit, research interests fit, financial support, the quality of your community, and location. And so just to get into it, talking about advisor fit. One thing that's really important is that everyone has different needs from their advisor, and every advisor has a different mentoring strategy. So you should make sure that you talk to the students in the lab about what it's like working with that specific advisor. And so there's a lot of different ways that advisors can vary. The things we've listed here: schedule and location flexibility, day-to-day involvement in your work, communication style. They're just a few of the examples that we can think of. And you can think about these in the way that they affect your life. So some professors are very involved in the day-to-day of your work, and some professors prefer to let students guide themselves and more just be there to help them out when they get stuck. And so the thing that we want you to think about is what mentoring strategies have worked for you in the past, and whether this advisor that you're interested in can meet those mentoring needs. One thing we want you to know is that your advisor is going to be a part of your life for a long time. So across the board, because this person is going to be sort of your science parent for 5 to 7 years and will write you letters beyond that, you always want an advisor who is excited about you. You want someone who will hype you up. You want someone who's interested in your work and someone who's invested in your success. You want someone who will look out for you, because your advisor is going to be your primary advocate in the field, in the department, and in the lab. And so you really want to make sure that this is someone who is going to go to bat for you. All right, our next topic is research interest fit. And that slide will show up at some point. Okay. I'm just going to make it so I can see it. Okay, so in terms of research interest fit, oh, I lost it. Thank you. So you want to think about and make sure that you're really genuinely interested in the work that you're doing. Because if you're not, it'll make it harder to motivate yourself through the tough spots. And so ask people in the lab and think about that day-to-day research, if this is the type of work you want to do. Some types of research are all about growing plants, and some are about pipetting. And in some labs, you just sit in front of a computer all day. And think about whether your day-to-day life in this field appeals to you. You also want to make sure that the department can support the research that you want to do. So if you need special equipment, special types of locations or materials, and some examples of that can be things like infrastructure and research supplies, access to lab space, or field sites like a marine station, or research and travel grants. Sorry guys, this slide just never showed. All right. And then another really important topic is going to be financial support. And this is so important that we had an entire session about financial support last week and talking through the ins and outs of what that can look like. But it's really important that you ask about this, because the amount of money that you're paid has a big impact on your life. And so sometimes the amount that you'll get paid and some parts of how you're paid are built into the program, but you do not have to feel afraid about asking about this. We really encourage you to ask. And so one thing that really matters in detail is the stipend relative to the local cost of living. So if they're going to give you a $25,000 stipend, that will go a lot farther in Indiana than it will in Berkeley. So make sure that you check that out. We also want you to encourage or to ask about how much you'll be TAing versus other sorts of funding, because the way that you are paid will affect your experience. So if you are fully funded but TAing every single quarter, you're going to have less time for your research than if you have a fellowship. And don't be afraid to ask about this.
All right. So in addition to these considerations about your potential advisor, your research fit, as well as finances, it is really important to consider, I don't know why these slides aren't changing. It is really important, there we go. It is really important to consider the overall lab and department community that you'll be joining, as these are the people that you'll be surrounded by during your time in graduate school. So the first thing to determine here is whether the lab and or the program that you're joining fosters a supportive and collaborative environment. And one thing to think about here to really consider is the level of competition versus collaboration within the community that you'll potentially be joining. Now, the amount of competition that people like and can thrive within is really dependent upon the person. But generally, you want to be a part of a community where the people are working together, or at the very least, encouraging one another to put out the best work possible. So some ways to think about this in terms of collaboration, you can ask how often people in the lab or the department work on projects and co-author papers together. Are they working together? Do they get along? And another way to think about this would be if people feel comfortable and are excited to talk about their work and brainstorm project ideas without any fear of maybe being ridiculed or even having their ideas stolen or scooped from them. Another key when thinking about the quality of the community is whether or not this program supports your personal growth as much as they support your academic growth. So it is really, really common for programs and departments to support your academic development through classes, seminars, your research, your lab meetings, and things like that. But are they also giving you opportunities to grow in other ways? So some examples of this at the department level might be, are there regular events for you to cultivate relationships with people in the community? So the amount of socializing that you want to do, again, is really dependent upon the person, but it's really awesome to be a part of a community where you recognize people and you can have conversations about research and things that are going on in life. Another thing might be, are there departmental-based mentoring programs where basically you as a newer student have the opportunity to talk to students who have been there for a bit longer and can give you access to all that knowledge, the institutional knowledge that they have been accumulating? Or are there active communities or committees that you can participate in that focus on improving the structure and the culture of the community, such as a DEI committee? These are all things to consider when looking at the quality of the community or the lab that you'll be joining. And finally, our last factor that we want you all to carefully consider is the area where you will be living in while in graduate school, and whether it's a place that you can feel safe and happy. So this one might sound a bit weirder and a little different from the other factors that we've presented, but you have to remember that for a PhD program, you'll be spending the next 4 to 7 years of your life in that location, and you'll be going to graduate school, so you'll be a graduate student, but you are not just a student. You are a person with a whole assortment of interests and values, beliefs and hobbies, and you want to be able to grow in those areas just as much as you grow academically during grad school years. So a major consideration when choosing a graduate program is whether or not this program is in a location where you can build a life outside of lab. So there are a couple different ways that this can look in terms of building that life and growing in different ways outside of your research. But some things to think about might be access to outdoor spaces. If you really love the ocean and you are all about being in the water, surfing before going into lab, you're not going to want to live in the Midwest for graduate school. That's not going to work for you. Other things might be proximity to family, the socio-political climate, and if you will be in an area that really respects your beliefs, whether or not there are communities that you identify with, the size of the city or the town, transportation, all of these things are things that you can think about and consider about the location of the program so that you can not only survive, but also thrive in graduate school. Okay, so now that we have given you all our top 5 tips for finding a good fit, we want you to tell us which of these factors are most important to you, and also share what some current and recent graduate students think. So with that, I want you all to take a minute to think about the 5 factors that we have presented and answer this poll with what factor is most important to you. So it's like most of you have said that your most important factor is advisor fit, but you can see that there's at least a vote or a few votes for each one of these factors, which is absolutely okay. The thing about finding a good fit is that these factors are going to be different for every single person. Okay, before moving on to what some current and recent graduate students say, are there any factors that came up in those opening breakout rooms that we didn't talk about? And you can send it to the chat, or you can come off of mute and share.
I did have one I just thought of. One group member that I have talked about accessibility issues, and that's really important to her when she's selecting a site, which I thought was definitely valid and important.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. And I think that they just put that in the chat. So accessibility is absolutely huge, for sure. Thank you so much to both of you for sharing. Okay, so now that you've thought about what matters to you, we want to present some survey results from a survey that we sent out asking some current and recent UC Davis graduate students about how they rate these factors and their importance when choosing a graduate program. So just by looking at this, you can see their results really resemble you all's, where everyone feels a bit differently about this. We are seeing more priority for advisor fit being the most important and location being the least, but you can see in this column for most important that there are a number of people that put each of these factors as their most important thing to consider when choosing a program relative to the others. And that's absolutely fine, because again, everyone will consider these a bit differently. And what's important is that you choose a program in a place, a lab that's just right for you. Now, with that said, we are going to transition into our faculty flash talks, where we are going to hear from faculty at some different career stages about how they found a good fit and how they navigated into their current careers. So we have a great lineup for you all today. We have some people in a variety of academic positions here in population biology at UC Davis. And each person will have about 7 minutes to talk about, again, how they navigated into their current careers and found a good fit at their career stages. And we will take questions as we're transitioning to the next person. But first up, we will have Rachel Bay.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to chat with you all today. I'm Rachel Bay. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Evolution and Ecology here at UC Davis. I've also included my contact information. If you have any questions on anything, feel free to contact me after the session. So first, I'll talk to you about my path to here. I started at undergrad at University of Miami. I knew I wanted to do something marine. I've always loved the ocean, but wasn't quite sure what. And late in my undergrad, I got started working with marine microbes. So that gave me a chance to do field work and to do some experiments. But to be honest, I didn't really love what I was doing day to day, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I decided to do a master's because it's sort of less of a time commitment overall and gave me a chance to try out a different fields. So I went to Dalhousie University and did computational biology, again with marine microbes, but I was one of those scientists that sat in front of my computer all day long. And what I learned about that was that I actually liked the analytical part of science. I liked sitting in front of my computer, but I did miss the interaction with organisms. So when I went to choose a PhD, I wanted to combine those two bits. I ended up going to Hopkins Marine Station, where I worked on coral reefs. And I did a project with a genomics of coral reefs, which allowed me to do some field work and also spend a lot of time doing analysis on the computer. And it turned out I really loved evolution. I really am interested in genetics, and the project was a good fit for me. So I was able to combine the little bits that I liked from each of those previous stages into sort of a research program. I did a postdoc on UCLA doing a really similar project, but this time in birds, still combining the sort of organismal experience with the computational part of science. So I've talked a little bit about what motivated me in each of these moves, but I thought I'd back up a little bit and talk about what motivated me in these moves generally. So originally, when I was thinking about going to college in the first place, I, like probably a lot of you, had this like innate love of nature. I always liked being outside. I particularly liked being in the ocean. And so that's what drove me to major in marine biology as an undergrad. But I didn't know anything about research. I didn't even realize research was a possible job. And so it wasn't until later in undergrad that it became a possibility and an opportunity for me to start answering original questions. And when I did that, I realized that I really love the process of research. And that's another just part of my personality. I've always been very curious and loved puzzles. And so that fit with doing original research really well. And then finally, one of my other motivating factors that Catherine and Alexis mentioned is my family. So at least some of those moves took into account things that my family needed. This is my husband and my daughter on the beach there. And so they're a really important part of where I choose to live and what I choose to do as well. My lab uses genomic techniques to study evolution and human-induced evolution. So different ways that people alter the environment and alter evolutionary trajectories. So I thought I'd just give you a taste of a few of those projects. We do a lot of work on coral reefs still, and we think about whether corals can adapt to climate change. So particularly thinking about whether they have genes that are encoding thermal tolerance. Some of you probably know Maddie. I think she's a mentor here. She's working on a project on purple urchins and think about whether they can adapt to urban seascapes. And we're also interested in how organisms shift their ranges with climate change. So I have a postdoc working on this little guy here, Anna's hummingbird, which used to be found in sort of northern limit around Sacramento and now is found all the way up in Alaska. So we use genetic techniques to understand these phenomenon, to understand why they happen, and to potentially predict future evolutionary trajectories. So the thing that ties this all together is evolution and DNA. So I guess I'll wrap up by talking about my own personal opinions on the types of things that you should look for when finding a good fit. And a lot of these were already touched on. Catherine and Alexis did a much more thorough job than I could ever do. But the first is just, what are you passionate about? And to be honest, for me, this took a little bit of time to figure out. I knew I liked nature and I knew I liked research, but I didn't know how those really fit together to find a specific thing to focus on. I tended to be really broadly interested in science, but it took me a while to understand the parts of my personality that really keyed in on evolutionary puzzles, for example. The second thing that I always ask students when I'm talking to them is, how have your experiences shaped your interests? So one thing to remember is that you are bringing something to the table when you're talking to a potential advisor. You've had experiences that have led you to this point, and that brings something unique to the lab you're trying to enter. So think about what you've done so far and how it's gotten you to this particular point. How do you work best? So as these guys mentioned, each advisor is different and each person has a different work style, and making sure those are a good fit will make you happier throughout your PhD. So some people like to touch base only when they have trouble, maybe every couple months, and some people like a more standard regular meeting schedule with their advisor, and that fit is really important. And then finally, what support structures are most important for you? So that might be family, that might be a particular community, that might be mountains to scale when you need some exercise, or a particular health resource. But thinking about your priorities there and whether they're available at the places that you're considering is also important. And that's it for me.
I have a question. Oh no, Katie has one.
Katie has, yes.
Go for it.
Go ahead, Katie.
Sorry, I didn't know if you could see the hand raise or not. I just had a quick question. I was wondering if you could touch a little bit more on why you decided to do a master's before a PhD. I'm kind of considering both, and I'm leaning more towards a master's, but I just wondered if you had any general advice for that stage.
Yeah, so for me, I found that I liked the process of research, but I didn't know enough about what particular field I wanted to research to commit to spending 5 to 7 years on something. And so for me, a master's was a really nice way to try out a field that I hadn't honestly done a lot of before without making that long-term commitment. I know a lot of people come through life like having one particular thing that they just want to research forever, and maybe a PhD immediately is more appropriate in that case. But I think I had a little bit more of a broad interest and needed to try a few things out first.
Yeah, thank you. I feel very similarly, so that helps a lot. Thank you again.
Awesome. Okay, thank you again, Rachel. Hannah, I see that you have a question in the chat, but we are going to have to move on to our next speaker, and hopefully you will have the opportunity to ask your question during the breakout rooms. But Louis, you can go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm Louis Yang. I'm an ecologist, and I'm going to give a talk that has 2 parts and 5 slides. The first part is going to be about how and why I became a professor. And the second part is going to be some very brief advice on finding a good fit for grad school. The first part is a bit of story time. There's probably a lot of ways to tell that story. And when I thought about it for this talk, this is the way it came out. So I'm going to dive in with slide number 2. So you could say that I grew up Asian American. I was born in Australia and I was raised in Appalachia. As a kid, I was pretty culturally confused. I couldn't understand, my grandparents. I didn't know why my family called the trash can a rubbish bin. I was pretty sure that gumbo was a Taiwanese dish. I really didn't know, how I fit in, and I was. That's probably one reason I was sort of skeptical of labels. I knew that I didn't fit into any particular box, but I got pretty good at observing myself. What I figured out is that I knew I liked being outside, and I liked thinking about animals. At first, when I was a kid, I thought maybe I want to be a pet shop owner. By the time I was in high school, I was volunteering at a local veterinary clinic. And I remember clearly spending time with the vet techs when they took smoke breaks outside the clinic. And I'll never forget, doing my first, assisting with my first canine euthanasia. I also remember the doctors sort of telling me gently but honestly that the best part of being a veterinary doctor was the animals, and that the rest of it could be pretty frustrating. And that got me thinking a little bit. I started learning about ecology and evolution, essentially in the summer before college. I was reading books. And in college, I briefly thought about making nature documentary films. But then I somehow made the decision to dive into ecology. I think a big part of that was finding a kind and generous undergraduate advisor. I think finding really good friends was another big part of that. But I think that on reflection, the biggest part of figuring this thing out was spending a lot of time observing myself. So for a long time, the one thing I knew for sure is that I did not want to be a professor. My parents immigrated from Taiwan. They came to the US in the late 70s. I've recently been reading a bit about the history of Taiwan, and I have a better sense of the world they were leaving behind. But at the time, they seemed very forward-looking. They were not tiger parents. My mom was always trying to get me to get lower grades to avoid striving for perfection. But one thing I could see was that they worked really hard. And so this is the place where I'll mention that my dad was a professor. He was a professor of chemical engineering. And so I had an uncommon opportunity as a kid to preview the life of an academic. I could tell that he was really excited about ideas. I could tell that he enjoyed research. I could tell that he enjoyed teaching, but I could also see up close just how hard he was working. And in retrospect, I recognized that a lot of that was because of all the linguistic and cultural translation that he had to do. But at the time, it looked really hard. And I was pretty sure I didn't want to sign up for that life. I was pretty sure I did not want to be a professor. Over time, I changed my mind. I'm not sure exactly when, but somewhere along the line, I realized that being a professor was actually the right fit for me. I observed a few things. First, I noticed that I really liked doing science outside, but I also really liked the parts of science that happen inside, and sometimes just inside my own head. I also realized that I really appreciate the freedom of being a professor, the intellectual freedom, which is sort of another way of saying that I'm stubbornly independent and I like figuring things out for myself. And I really can't imagine having a job where someone else told me what to do. So I really like the freedom of finding my own work-life balance and deciding what I spend time on. I also found that I really like the people I got to work with in science. I also like teaching and I like learning from students. So at this point, I'm not really spending a lot of time reconsidering my career choices. I chose a career that is certainly a lot of hard work, but I honestly don't think it's any harder than any other line of work. And maybe more importantly, I think it's a really good fit for me. I also know now more than ever that everyone takes a different path and finds their own way, and everyone has to figure out their own good fit. Which brings me to my last slide, which is my advice for students considering grad school. Number one, that old chestnut, I'd encourage you to be yourself. You'll never actually know if you've found the right path until you are yourself, which is watch yourself as you do things. Take note of the things that make you happy, excited, and engaged. Those are pretty good clues that you're on the right path. When you email professors, be yourself. When you apply to grad school, be yourself. When you're on a grad school interview, be yourself. Second, think about what you want to do. And when I say that, I'm not saying that you should know the specifics of what you want to do for your dissertation. Some students do, some don't. That's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what do you want to do with your grad school experience? Where do you want to end up after grad school? Are the labs and programs you're applying to on that path? Number three, think about why you want to do this thing that you want to do. Grad school ain't easy, and I don't know anyone that gets through it unscathed. No matter where you go, there will be a moment where you question if you made the right decision. Knowing why you're doing this really difficult thing that you've set yourself up to do will help you persist through the thick and the thin. Fourth, and I think this is especially hard to remember when you're applying to grad school, is to try and convince yourself that getting into the program isn't the goal. The goal is to find a good fit, an advisor in a lab that'll help you on your path, colleagues that'll support you. Getting in isn't the win. You're trying to find a good fit. And then fifth, don't forget always that it's your job to choose. You're not just being chosen. So this process is a two-way street. You're choosing a program and they're choosing you. So be deliberate, proceed with intention, and trust your gut. So if you're in that situation, good luck.
Thank you so much, Louis. That was great.
Louis, how did your parents take it after years of you saying that you weren't going to be a professor when you said, I'm going to be a professor?
There was never a moment. That's, when I think about this, there was never a moment where it sort of, there was a light bulb that went off and I decided. It sort of settled in over years and years. And then it went from being no way am I going to do that to being, of course, that's what I want to do. And I can't quite put my finger on where that transition happened.
Thank you.
I think a lot of us can relate to that. That you have a path that you're considering, and then it just shifts, and you're like, I don't know when or where, but it did, for sure. So thank you so much for sharing. If you have questions for Louie, please hang on to them, as you will probably have a chance to ask within the breakout room. But now we're going to go on to our next speaker, and that is Carol Hum.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. In case you want to contact me after this, here's my information, and I'm always happy to respond. So about me, here's my CV in a few bullet points. I'm a first-gen college grad. I went to college majoring in biology. So all of my relatives went, oh gosh, you can become a doctor since you like biology. I said no. After my BS, I went straight to graduate school. The place I wound up was UT Knoxville, where I got my PhD. My relatives said, why so far away? Well, Stanford and Berkeley and UCLA and places like that didn't want me. So I moved from California to Tennessee. After that, though, I came back to California. I was a postdoc in the theoretical ecology here. After the postdoc, I taught math for a very long time. And during this whole period here, I wrote the papers, developed curriculum in calculus, and applied for faculty jobs during a very tight job market. But in 1998, I became an academic coordinator, which for me turned out to be a really good fit. So what's an academic coordinator? Here's an analogy with my two previous dogs. Here's the current one. They're all herding breeds who keep the flock together. Academic coordinators help keep faculty, students, and programs together. at UC campuses. And briefly, this is a non-faculty academic job, and so I'm constantly immersed in research, teaching, and things like that. Across my career, I've been involved in training programs across the science that combined science research with the implications on the society. And I've done admin stuff, curriculum development, teaching, and mentoring. As to how I found this fit for me, two things were key. One, I happened to be in the right place at the right time. A faculty colleague said to me one day, "We need somebody who can help run this program. You willing to try?" I thought about it a minute and said, "Sure, why not?" The second thing, so my lesson from this is sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. The second factor in my case is I had perceptive mentors. Another colleague said, "You like doing research, teaching, and administration. We can put together a job that has these pieces. What do you think?" I thought about it and said, "You know, you're right. I'd like doing that. Sure, I'll do that." And so I did. The lesson from this, sometimes your mentors may understand you better than you understand yourself. What I'm focusing on in the last part of my career is working with faculty to change the face of the academy, and for all of you, as you think about how to find your fit, remember my two lessons from previously. don't underestimate the power of being at the right in the right place at the right time to take advantage of the things that just happened to come up. The right place need not be where your whole family lives, but being away from them, whoops, could be temporary. 5 to 7 years to do a PhD in the grand scheme of things really isn't that long of a time. And mentors can be your advocates. And in some, what I'm doing is not the career I had envisioned, but in retrospect, I wouldn't change a thing. I get to work with bright and inspiring students. I get to do a cool science with societal implications, and I'm working on raising up the next generation of faculty with my students and colleagues. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carol, for sharing with us today. If anyone has questions for Carol, please type them in the chat or come off mute and say them while Peter Wainwright pulls up his presentation.
Carol, what would you say is the most unexpected, favorite part of your new job?
Most unexpected part is I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to understand a lot more of cell biology than I ever thought I would, because that's half of my job these days.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Carol, for sharing. And if anyone has questions for Carol, please hang on to them, as you will get the chance to ask her about them in your breakout rooms. But now we are going to move on to our final speaker for the day, which is actually Catherine and I's advisor, Peter Wainwright.
Aha. Hi, everybody. Really great to be here. As I think you might have figured out by now looking at this slide, I'm a fish biologist, and my interests in fish are really broad. So it's just the ecology and evolution of fishes and everything. So sort of everything about fishes is something I'm interested in. So here's the motivation. I just am so fascinated by the diversity. There's so many different kinds of fish. They look so different. They look so variable. They're colorful in different ways. Sometimes it's all about camouflage. Sometimes it's all about showing off to mates. Sometimes it's other things. They're incredibly diverse in body shapes and in the way that they undergo life, the way they swim, the way they feed, sort of everything about them is diverse and just spectacular. And I just sort of have found that I kind of can't get enough of it. So this is my motivation. And I'll pick up on almost any thread about the diversity of fishes and follow it in research projects. One of the particular things we like to study in my lab is the way that fish feed. And as you just saw, the feeding mechanism of fish can be wildly different from our own feeding mechanism. And it can be complicated, and it can be really physical, and it can be just incredibly interesting, and it can evolve in really bizarre ways. So it's a sort of endless source of fascination for me and for lots of folks that have been in my lab. But here's my other motivation, is actually the people that go through my lab. And here is my current group of graduate students, some of which you've gotten to know already today, Catherine and Alexis. But there are three other graduate students. Two of these folks are just starting this year. And so as I get older, I care more and more about the people that go through my lab and go out into careers, whether it's in academia or elsewhere, but have spent a really significant part of their professional life in my lab, sort of working with me and working with other people in my lab. And I really care about that. I really care about what happens to them. I care that they have the right kind of experience when they're in graduate school. I don't want it to be, several people have pointed out that it's not exactly easy doing a PhD, doing a higher level degree. It's not easy, and it's not supposed to be easy, but it can be incredibly fun and incredibly rewarding. And that's, I guess, what I'm after, and helping people have that experience. I'm a professor here at UC Davis. There are high expectations on professors in the University of California for research and also in teaching. And I think the biggest thing I point to, really, in terms of what I've accomplished over the years, isn't actually so much the specific research anymore, but I care much more, as I said, about the people that go through my lab and go out, and many of them go on to become professors, and there are people who've been in my lab that are now in faculty positions all around the world and around the country, and that's just something that means a lot to me now. What motivated me? How did I get into this career? For me, it was just like an incredibly natural, almost unconscious process. And it all started out with the fact that when I was a kid, I got started going fishing. I would go down to the local creek, and I saw critters in the water, and I wanted to figure out how to catch them. And I got lucky, and I met this sort of old codger that lived in the neighborhood, and he taught me some basics about fishing when I was about 11 years old. And one thing led to another. The more I caught fish, the more I started to learn about them. The more I learned about them, eventually, suddenly it dawned on me that, hey, I actually knew more about fish than the next person over there. And that turned into this positive feedback loop that just sort of led me on this kind of pathway, both in school and in my recreational life, on this pathway where before you knew it, I had this passion about fish. And the more, I got interested in sort of everything about them. And academia and graduate school just became a sort of natural outgrowth of that. And when I went to graduate school, I discovered that I simply thrived doing research on fish and publishing the research. It's sort of one of the main things we do with the research is we publish papers on it. And I just discovered that I just really liked that process. And so I was just in hog heaven. I couldn't sort of believe that how lucky I got the kind of one thing after another and kind of stumble into something good. I think one of the sort of comments that I would make is that I don't think that there is a sort of necessarily a single perfect career or life for you out there. I think there are a lot of great lives for you out there. And it's definitely a process of you making decisions and choices what way am I going to go and what are the things I'm going to pursue. But I don't think you have to worry that there's an absolutely best choice or right choice, and there are lots of good choices out there. And so your pathway can be tortuous. Your decisions can lead you in various directions. And there's a lot of ways that it could go, and they could all be successful and they could all be good lives. And so don't fear that part of it. In terms of thinking about going from where you are now to becoming a graduate student, to me, I think the most important thing is to really pay attention to what it is you're getting interested in. What is it you are interested in and would eventually like to do? It's a surprisingly, I think, as you know, it's a surprisingly hard thing to figure out, I think. And a lot of it has to do with building on experiences. So experiences the more you do something, you either get sick of it or you get more interested in it. And so quite often you just sort of have to dive in with things and just take a shot at it and see how it goes and follow your instincts. But you really have to pay attention, I think, to what you're getting interested in. Get advice from people who you know, who are your mentors now, about where you might consider looking for graduate school. And specifically, it's not just about the schools, it's really about the major professors. You saw the number one thing that people think is the most important factor in choosing a graduate school is finding a good fit with the major professor. And I think that's probably right. And so that process starts before you go to school, that you should be looking for prospective mentors, if you will, prospective major professors. And way earlier than you think seems reasonable, you should reach out to them and send an email to them and explain a little bit about your background and what you're interested in and why you're writing to them. And your interest in possibly going there for graduate school, and just try to start a conversation with them and see where it leads. And as Louis said, be yourself, absolutely be yourself about it. And I think that you'll find that people are very open to your inquiries and interested in your inquiries. But you really have to make a personal sort of connection. You have to find individual people, and they'll help you in that. Once you find some possibilities, they'll help you find that pathway to exactly where to apply and so forth. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing. And thank you to all of the faculty and staff who shared with us today. Does anyone have any questions for Peter before we head into our breakout rooms?
We can just, there it is. All right, so we hope you had a really good time in your breakout rooms and that you had a chance to interact with these faculty and get some of those important questions answered. So we'll do some quick concluding remarks. Taking away from this session, we really want to encourage you all to prioritize your fit. We know that no place will be perfect, but you can find a place that works really well for you. And we want to encourage you to be careful about choosing a place or a lab just because it has a big name. If there's a place that doesn't have a big name, but puts out great students that do what you want to do, then consider that really seriously. And think about how this lab could be right for your future goals. So thinking about what the students have gone on to do and whether that's what you want. And then our other things that we really, really want to encourage you all to not be afraid to ask all of your questions. You will not seem unprofessional if you ask questions that aren't research focused. You will just seem prepared. The only thing that could go wrong is if you did a disservice to yourself by not making the most informed decision that you could. So make sure that you can find a place where you can prioritize your happiness and find a place where you can grow and thrive. And just know that there are a lot of places where you can get a great education and have a really good experience. So let's do a big thank you for our faculty speakers. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy that you all came today. So we're gonna send this link to the chat, but we'd really appreciate it if you would take a moment and fill out this poll. Oh, I think maybe somebody already sent the link. Many thanks, Danielle. But so we'd love to get your feedback and find out how to make this session better for next year. All right, and we also just want to remind you, so Finding a Good Fit is session 4 in our 5-session program for E&E Grad Preview. So please feel free to come join us on Thursday. We'll have an office hour session. You can get all your questions answered. And then next week, join us on Tuesday, and you can take a deep dive into you and whether you think that this is right for you and what is right for your next step. So you can always, please dig deeper with us. Chat with your mentor. You can find a recording of this session on our website, and we're also on Twitter and Instagram, and you can contact us by email. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.
Thanks for joining.